Hello everyone, it's Tanya from Tinkering in Ink with Tanya, and I am going to do a comparison video here comparing Distress Oxide inks with the new Hero Arts Reactive inks. They just came out with those and I absolutely adore them. Here I am showing you the Distress inks and the Hero Hues inks that I have that are close together in color, and we're going to use those to do a few techniques and compare how they perform with each other. There are, I think there's 15 colors of the Hero Hues, and I got 14. I didn't think I needed the white. Here I show how I have labeled mine. I just wrote on the sides of the Distress Oxides. And for the Hero Hues, I used some labels that I sponged with the inks and wrote the names and cut them down. The first technique we're going to use with these is solid image stamping. So I'm just inking up some spiced Marmalade ink here and stamping it on Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. It cleans off of the stamp beautifully. Now we're going to try the Hero Hues Creamsicle ink. Inking that up, picks it up beautifully, stamps down. They look pretty much identical. As you'll see as I bring them a little closer to the camera here. They both have a good stamped image. They both clean off of the stamp well. They look pretty much the same. The colors are even almost identical. So we're going to try a sentiment stamp with them. See how well they stamp those. Beautiful, nice, solid stamping. Only one try, you don't have to, it's a nice juicy ink. These are both a hybrid ink. They have properties of pigment and dye inks together. Because they have the pigment component, they stay wet longer, and you can do some embossing with them. Here I have some clear embossing powder, and I am just going to sprinkle it over each. And they're not as not stinky, they're not stinky at all. There's no odor. But they are not as sticky as Versamark or other watermark or embossing inks, but they do hold the embossing powder well. That is the Distress Oxide version, and here is the Hero Hues version. Brightens it up a bit, and they didn't feel like they were going to smear on the paper, so I didn't feel I had to heat emboss them. They do take a little extra time to dry though. So we're going to try another fine line image. All of the images we've used so far are from Concord and 9th sets that I will link in the description box below if you're curious which sets those came from. So worn lipstick and taffy inks here. The taffy ink is brighter. It's actually probably closer to the picked raspberry color. Now we're going to do some ink blending with the blending tools. The sponge for the worn lipstick is a well-seasoned sponge, and it blends nice and smooth. This one is a new sponge, so of course it's requiring a little extra love here. Once you've used your sponges a few times and they're pretty well saturated with the ink, they blend much smoother and much easier. You don't have to pick up as much ink off of the ink pad, and we're getting there. You're just seeing me use it for the first time. So we've got Festive Berries and Fruit Punch here, and those colors are pretty similar. The Hero Hues ink again is a brighter color, maybe closer to Abandoned Coral. I'm hoping to get more of the Distress Oxide inks here soon, because I want them all. They're all so pretty. Again, trying to get that ink, that sponge loaded up with as much ink as I can to help make this a better comparison. So far they're blending very smoothly. You don't see, just like with the Distress Oxides, you can blend out any harsh circular shapes from when you first put the sponge down. You just keep going, and then I'm blending over the top of each other, and they do transition quite nicely. You can see the differences in the colors here. So now I'm going to take a watercolor brush and load it up with some water and just spatter it on the blended areas to see how they react to the water. The Distress Oxides seem to go more white in the water spotted areas, and the Hero Hues seem to just fade back but retain some of the color and maybe reveal some of the underlying color if you've got two inks layered over each other. The Lorne lipstick seems to fade back to white the most here. Slightly different looks, both gorgeous. I personally am a little more drawn to the Hero Hues reaction there. So now we're going to do some ink smooshing. I'm putting some Festive Berries and some worn lipstick down. Remember this, right now we are using not watercolor paper. It's just 80-pound Nina Solar White. So it can take some water, but not a ton. You're going to see a lot of warping in the paper, and I'm going to be heat setting this a bunch. So this is the first smoosh. You see how it layers nicely. And I'm just going to keep picking up that ink off of the craft mat and drying it with the heat tool until I've used up all of the ink on the craft mat, because I don't want to waste it. And I still had ink on the the Hero Hues side of the craft mat, but I covered it with that rag just so that I wouldn't be picking it up by accident on this one, to try to keep this comparison as true as possible. It's layering up beautifully. I don't know why I don't use distress inks very often. I should pull them out more often. I do use the plain distress inks quite a lot. I think I just forget about the Distress Oxides. All right, so here I've smushed on some of the Taffy and Fruit Punch inks onto the craft mat. You can still see some of the sponged layers left. Now this one, it just seems to blend together, and we're just gonna keep trying. I'm gonna dry it and dab again into the water, or the ink and water, and now we're starting to see the layers build up. Just gonna keep smushing it down, drying it off, or heat setting it to speed the drying process, and layering more and more on top. It's really turning into a beautiful blend. I don't know if I'm going to be able to use these pieces for anything more than die cuts, because they have a combination of things on them. Well, we'll see. So there's the difference. You can definitely feel the chalky texture on the Distress Oxide version. The Hero Hues version is nice and smooth. Both of them are beautiful. I could have stopped right there, but I want to see how we can layer. Oh, sorry. I am sprinkling water on again to see how they reactivate and how they behave when I add that. Not much difference there. Maybe if I'd used more water, it would have made a difference. Now we're going to see how another color layers over the top. Distress Oxides that's one of their biggest selling points, was that you could layer other colors on top of them and they didn't muddy down and they didn't change colors as long as the layer underneath it was dry. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're spritzing some water on, adding some water and breaking up the little pattern from the ink pad, and then just smushing it down into the ink. So the Wilton Violet just seems to have disappeared into the other inks on this page, or on this piece of paper. We're going to keep trying though. So I dried that, and you can actually see the purple start to show up. This is gorgeous. Just vibrant and beautiful. I am loving this. So I'm going to keep going. Again, going to use up all of that ink. And I think with the Wilted Violet, I want a more intense purple. I want to see if I can get that purple to show up. So I'm going to keep adding. I'm going to put a bunch more ink on the craft mat and spritz that down again, and make that nice and wet. I'm actually spattering some of that ink on there, and you can see it show up more now. I think maybe it got too diluted and too, I think some of the Distress Oxide, the Worn Lipstick and the Festive Berries mixed with the Wilted Violet with the water on the craft mat, and that may have been my problem at first. Now you can start to really see the Wilted Violet show up. We're going to add a little more of the grape slush too. And that's the Hero Hues purple that I'm using here. I'm going to spatter that on, see how that does, and it just layers beautifully over the top of that paper. I'm sitting here looking at the actual finished product on both of those after they've had a chance to dry completely, and they look so similar. You almost can't tell them apart. When you touch them, you can feel it, and still the Hero Hues is a bit brighter. So now I've got some watercolor paper. I'm stamping the sentiment Smile, which is an open work sentiment, and we're going to watercolor on that. We're using VersaFine Onyx Black on the watercolor paper. And then I'm going to use, you can't really see what I'm doing because I'm trying to not put the watercolor paper in the puddles of ink that I have on the craft mat, because I don't want to smush more on there and waste any ink. I have refills for the Distress Oxides, but Hero Hues, they don't have refills for those. I don't know if they intend to make them. Hero Arts does not tend to make ink refills for their ink pads, but I'm hoping they will. It may be a hope in vain, but I like ink refills. I like that I don't have to get a whole new pad with an ink refill. So that is one of the other benefits of the Distress Oxides. They do have ink refills. Hero Hues, they do not. So this is the Wilted Violet. I'm just adding water with my watercolor brush to the puddles of ink on the craft mat. And initially this grape slush looks a lot brighter on the paper than the Distress Oxide, the Wilted Violet. But as it dries, they begin to look exactly the same color. I can't believe how close those colors are. I'm looking at the finished product in my hand, and they look practically like the same color. I try to pick up a little bit of that grape slush that I got outside of the black line. It might have worked better if I waited till it was dry. That generally is how it works the best. Here is the Festive Berries, and I'm blending that over the previous color. And as it dried, because the purple was dry when I added them, it just created a harsh, organic edged transition. I like it in the end. It's pretty cool, but these inks do make wonderful watercolor inks. They go on so smooth. You can dilute them out to make a big variant in colors. They blend beautifully. You can combine them together with other colors to create custom colors, and both of these ink pads and the inks in them perform pretty much the same. You can't really see the chalkiness of the Distress inks, although where I've gone over the black line, it's more opaque with the Distress inks, and the Hero Hues ink, the black stays vibrant and looks like the black stamping is over the watercolor colors. So that's nice. The black line stays nice and vibrant on those. All right, so let's clean that up and move on to the next. The next technique, which is, oh, nope, we're just going to take another quick look at the finished product, and you can see that they look pretty much identical. And yes, you can definitely tell which one was the Hero Hues because I accidentally put my stamp pad on the watercolor paper. So here we have stamping on black cardstock. This is Fossilized Amber, and it, because of the white, there's like a white in the Distress Oxides, that's the oxidation, it really pops on the black cardstock. Whereas even though the Hero Hues Lemon Drop ink is very juicy and that stamp has a lot of ink on it, even after I've stamped it on the paper, it just kind of fades away into the black. So it does not stamp well, it does not show up well, at least the Lemon Drop, on black. And I chose a light colored ink because that would be, you would think, the most likely to show up. So now we're going to use some craft colored cardstock. And it's much better on the, well, the Distress Oxide ink shows up very well on that, but the Hero Hues really is much more vibrant. It actually performs better on the craft cardstock, I think, than the Distress Oxide. So that's a win for both. The black paper, the Distress Oxide ink did a better job, and the crumb cake or craft colored ink paper, the Hero Hues did just as well, if not better. So now I've got a couple of pieces of watercolor paper, and we're going to do watercolor wash, some spritzing, and some ink smooshing. So we've got a few things going on. I've got a flat brush here, putting a layer of watercolor wash on there, and now I'm going to spritz that wash and try to get a nice dripped effect here. And it is moving beautifully, has lots of like capillary effect there, so it's got the nice organic edge. However, the edge, the hard edge of where I stopped the watercolor wash is still visible. That does not seem to fade out with the Distress Oxide. You can see the different components of the color come out, the different blues and the slight purple undertone. It's really quite beautiful. I do love being able to see the different variations or components of the color when you add water and make it move around. So I sped this up also because you don't want to spend all of your time watching the heat set. And we're going to just keep smooshing into the puddles of ink, building our pattern, our watercolor look here. And this is one of my favorite things to do. It's quite beautiful. It's never the same. So even though we're doing the same technique with both the Distress Oxides and the Hero Hues, we're going to get a different look. The goal here is just to show you how they perform with the same technique. Lots of smooshing here. I'm going to add a little more water just to get the rest of that ink. Some of it had dried on the pad or on the craft mat. We've got a little more reactivation of the ink on the paper, which actually I really like that. I'm kind of glad I did that. I would love to see the different ink smooshing you all do. Okay, so we'll move on to the Hero Hues, adding some water, doing the watercolor wash. Partway through I decide, you know, I really should clean that off just in case there's extra Distress Oxide left. Getting lots of that color onto the paper, just like it did with the Distress Oxides, spritzing with some water, and look at how that moves. It just instantly, that hard edge goes away, and you get this lovely gradient effect down to the bottom of the page. Wonderful drips. Here I am drying it. I like to tilt it back and forth so we can continue to get more organic edges and not waste any of that ink, because ultimately that's what we want. We want all of those drips and drops and spots and spatters. We want all of that variation. That's what makes this such a beautiful technique. So I'm drying that good, and here we go. Smush, smush, smush. Lots of smushing. And I just love to watch what emerges as we dip it back into the ink on the craft mat and dry it so we can add another layer. This does not work if you don't dry between the layers because it just blends together and becomes mud or one solid blended out color. Almost done getting all the ink off of this craft mat. And those colors, as much as they seemed to be close to each other, they actually are different colors. The Faded Jeans has more purple to it than the Blue Hawaii from Hero Hues. There again, I spritzed more water on the craft mat, and it did reactivate again some of the ink on the paper. And again, I'm happy I did that because it just adds more to the whole technique. Just about done there. Gonna get some little bit of smearing here as I pick up the very last of the ink. Now I want to do that with all of the colors. They're so fun. Do a quick cleanup here. And you can see them up close. They both created a wonderful background. And yes, you can feel the chalkiness of the Distress inks on the paper, but it's a really subtle texture. They're both gorgeous. So here we've got the ink smooshing and blending on cardstock versus watercolor paper, the solid image stamping, and fine line stamping. I'm just going to quick show you each of the techniques that we've used so far in the video. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this helped you decide if you need the Hero Hues ink, which personally I think you do. It does different things. They're both gorgeous. Check out the list in the description box below and follow me everywhere. Don't forget to hit subscribe.